Thank you, Pat. First of all, let me say that 6 months ago, Annette would not have stood up here and talked to anybody. So she's come a long way in the last 6 months. And I hope that all of you recognize what a job that Annette and Margaret and Pat and Ted are doing. This is not an easy operation. Yes, give them a hand. They deserve it. This is not an easy undertaking that they've done for a couple of twin sisters who are doing this because of the children that they're raising. And it's a phenomenal undertaking, which I'm starting to learn here as I jump into this political arena. 6 months ago, we first got to know Margaret and Annette when we attended one of the first 9/12 meetings that they had, one of the get-togethers. I think it was on March 13th, if I'm not mistaken. My wife, Denise, and I, we were very concerned, probably like many of you, about the trends that were going on in the country. You know, we were worried about the size of the debt that was starting to occur and grow. We were worried about the growth of government and the areas that government was starting to get involved in. Most of all, I will tell you, I was worried about my 6 grandchildren. We have 6 grandchildren, one who was but 6 months old at that time, and I would look at her and wonder how she was ever going to be able to afford the debt that she didn't deserve, she didn't incur, but our generation was really laying on it. And that's what got us interested in starting to partake in a lot of these groups like, I heard the people say, the 9/12 group. Denise and I started attending. We started getting to meet a lot of you, a lot of people that we've grown, as Pat said, to get to know, to get to respect. As Pat will probably tell you, I don't do a lot of talking at a lot of these events. My wife is the vocal one. I usually sit back and listen. And the thing that I'm listening for is really to find out what it is that you really believe, what it is that you think, what it is that you want, what your passions are. And that's what I've seen in the last 6 months or so in going to, now including the tea parties, and going to these groups, then meeting with them, and watching the passion that's incurred. We mentioned it a second ago about taking the passion to Washington, D.C. There is and has been a time for that passion. That time has come out at the town hall meetings, and I think that it's had a great impact on making people stand up and be aware that there are those of us out here that are patriots that do want to slow down where government is going and what it's doing. And so I commend you all for what you've done to this point, and hope that you keep going as the time permits. Some of the areas that have impressed me the most, I think that as I've listened to you, what I've learned is that you're really founded in the patriotism, as they mentioned earlier, the love of the United States. You know, you look at the number of flags that are at all of the different rallies that we go to. We went to the rally the other night at the IBEW when they had the Obama bus come through. And you look at, how many of you were there? I think quite a few of you were probably there. You look at what was going on one side of the street, and it was all of the official signs that were made professionally, and the bus that was worth probably $2 million. And you look at those of us on the other side who had all the handmade signs and the flags and were singing the national anthem. You can tell where the real grassroots efforts are, where people are really founded. One of the things that's impressed me the most about every one of these events that I've attended is there is absolutely no cleanup. When you guys get done, you take care of yourselves, the responsibility, the individual responsibility that you show, that these types of groups show, is just phenomenal. And that's really, I think, one of the basic differences between those people that are conservative and those people that are liberal. And that is that individual responsibility, and I think you exemplify that real well, and I hope that you'll do it in Washington, D.C. also, because it sends a phenomenal message. If you remember the inauguration, when everybody walked away from the inauguration parade route, it probably took them 2 days to clean up the mess. When we walked away from Keener Plaza on April the 15th, Denise and I stayed behind to help clean up. There was no cleanup. Everybody took care of themselves. And it's that difference, the way you value yourself, the way you value your community, the way you value your country, I think that makes the big difference between those of us that are at meetings like this and those that are liberals. I know that there has been a debate going on in this country ever since the very beginning of our republic about big government, small government. Hamilton, Jefferson, and I think Senator Lemke is going to talk a little bit about that this evening, if I'm correct. and tell us how that battle kind of affects what's going on in today's world. I would submit to you that today is probably, that 2009 is probably the biggest, most important time, I guess, in that particular battle. Back in the early founding days, people were caught between it. I think John Adams was kind of caught between that battle between big government and small government. John, unlike others, Adams thought the definition of a republic had to do with its ends rather than its means. He wrote in Thoughts on Government, "There is no good government but what is republican." That the only valuable part of the British Constitution is so because the very definition of republic is an empire of laws and not of men. And I think that you'll see that there's a tremendous transition going on in this country where we're starting to rely, or people are trying to get you to rely more on the individuals and not necessarily the laws of the country. I think Senator Lemke is also going to share a little bit with us tonight about how some of these changes that are going on in Washington, D.C., Obamacare, the cap and trade program, how that's really not only impacting us nationally, but the impact it has on our local state economy and what goes on in the state. So I'm not going to delve into that. I'm going to leave that to the experts, to the senator. But I would again submit to you that I don't think the argument between big government and small government, between liberal and conservative, is any bigger than it is today. You take a look at the people that are surrounding our President of the United States, people like Van Jones, people like Bill Ayers, people like Jeffrey Jones. All of these individuals, these three individuals were avowed, I'll call them revolutionaries for lack of a better term. In their life, they have been avowed enemies of the government. And as you'll find out in a couple of minutes, I know a little bit about enemies of the government. You also take the difference of our powerful class and the way they're trying to separate themselves from us average Americans. Individuals like Charlie Rangel, the chair of the tax writing committee, writes the tax code, but is too powerful for it to apply to himself. Tim Geithner, who's the head of the IRS, oversees all the tax enforcement, but he doesn't have to obey the laws himself. He's too powerful. I think this is where that too big to fail stuff came from. You look a little bit about what is happening today between the big and powerful government and we the people. I think it's exemplified very well by what you see at some of these healthcare forums lately. The representatives, and you won't see that from our local representative, Senator Lemke, who's here to listen to you tonight, but the representatives from Washington, for the most part, did not want to hear what you had to say. They would erect barriers between themselves and the people, we the people. Sometimes those barriers were walls and doors. Sometimes those barriers consisted of SEIU union members. Sometimes those barriers just consisted of them not showing up in places they said that they would be. But they actually erected barriers between themselves and the public. And those barriers obviously stopped communication. And that is why I think there was so much passion about a lot of these things, why you had to yell, because you felt that nobody was listening to you. And I will submit to you, we'll talk a little bit more in a second, about just how important it is